Joanna, welcome to the Building and Growing podcast. We're delighted to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Lucas.
You're most welcome. So, Joanna Wlazlak is head of platform at Element Ventures. And would you like to kick off by telling us a bit about yourself and your experience, Jo?
With pleasure. So, yes, I am currently head of platform at Element Ventures. I always describe myself as a person that has, for the last 10 plus years, worked with and in startups. Started off at a distributor manufacturing company called OpenDesk, where I was a role in between product and marketing.
Yes.
Then I joined Cylon, which is a cybersecurity investor.
Wow.
And that's where I worked with, I think on the last count, probably 200 entrepreneurs,
Wow.
which were usually solo founders looking into starting their own company, and probably 150 really early stage, which would be typically pre-seed, seed stage startups. And there I was doing what is called program, which is effectively a way of designing content, which is a combination of workshops, one-to-one sessions, deep dives, to help them scale and grow as quickly as possible.
Wow.
And I did that with various governments and corporates. So we worked across the globe effectively. So we work in Southeast Asia, in Korea, Singapore, in the Middle East, in Oman and Kuwait, and obviously UK and Europe.
What a global role.
It was very global. So I also learned about different mindsets and approach to entrepreneurship.
Yes.
Which was very interesting to see how different and how similar at times they are. So that has been my recent role, most recent to Element, where I am now. And I have a official title is head of platform, which we'll touch on later. But Element is a VC B2B fintech fund focusing mostly on startups in Europe.
Okay, fantastic. And so you mentioned B2B fintech fund focused on startups in Europe. Are you able to give any more details about what type of stage Element's interested in investing in?
Yes, we say that it's Series A.
Yes.
And obviously that means many things these days. And we did invest in later seed and early Series B.
Yes.
But our sweet spot is actually Series A, because we found out that there are actually not that many funds that specialize in that stage. Our typical ticket size, which again changes, but is between 2 and 5 million pounds. So that's in terms of the stage.
Yes.
In terms of the areas that we usually look at, or some of the portfolio companies that we've invested in, are around vertical payments. And the next area that kind of relates indirectly to vertical payments is embedded product. So it's either lending as a service. We've got a company that is helping banks to manage the subscriptions for the users. So in the embedded product, embedded insurance, a company based out of Rostock in Germany. We have so that's an embedded. We've got a couple of banking as an infrastructure and some infrastructure products.
Yes.
Open banking as well. And we did kind of dip our toe into a digital asset space.
Yes.
Because we do say that we are investors in the future of the financial technology. And I think you can't, if you say that, you can't dismiss the digital asset space. So we did investment in a couple of startups that help, if anything, help companies to transition towards digital economy again, very much in the infrastructure space.
Yes.
I think this kind of describes both our portfolio companies, but also the areas that we look at. In the fintech space.
Fantastic. And very earlier on in your answer, you touched upon how sort of ticket sizes have been changing. And I was reading an article where it spoke about Series A rounds, say 5 years ago, are the equivalent ticket sizes of seed rounds of this year. So it's crazy how the numbers change over time.
It is, and I think it then goes, if you retro engineer that back into a metrics.
Yes.
I think also startups or companies or real founders, they really don't have that much yet traction. Because of that, have been driven to that market where they want to raise quite significant amounts of money.
Yes.
Without having a lot of traction yet, which I guess makes it really tricky for both sides, because it's really hard to set up a right level, because I think a lot of companies ask, what are the metrics you look out for when you invest? And sadly, the answer is always it depends, because you've seen, and then again, when they try to compare themselves to other startups that have raised, it raises the disappointment, I guess, of companies that didn't really have that much, except for really impressive team, and they try to compare. I think it's such a dynamic space, and it always has been, I think, that it always depends, and it's very sadly to always give that annoying answer, but it is probably reflecting of the market.
Indeed. And then going back to, the Element Ventures portfolio, a real big focus on B2B, which I might be a little bit biased, but definitely my favorite.
It is.
Yeah, things, at least from my experience in the B2B space, with Revolut Business, B2B startups, they're stickier. You've got the chance really to understand what levers are going to affect lifetime value. And so that's one reason why I'm really excited about this space.
It is. And I think some people are scared of. So I think one of the closest startup that we've invested in it's B2B still, but it has a C element to it.
Okay.
And one of our partners, he wrote a blog about it, and there's an app that obviously user can download. So a company is called Thirdford, and it makes it easier. It makes KYC on behalf of real estate companies.
Yes.
So they say they secure no risky business, and they secure big transactions of people's lives.
Yes.
In their lifetime, and one of them is buying a house. And there is an app, and we're so happy that one of the team members actually were buying a house at that time, and we could actually download the app and look at the whole experience without having to speak to people that use the app. So that was the only time where we kind of touch on the customer experience, the end consumer. But other than that, it's mostly B2B, and to be fair, B2C scares me. Like, how do you actually, you have to, I guess you aggregate the users, I'm sure, but it's a bit scary of how do you make people love your app. It really has to be something viral to take off in a way. Yeah, but on Revolut, it's I would expect it to be B2C, no?
So there is B2C, but then Revolut Business was B2B. So, it's sort of the lesser well-known product, but definitely there. And I think there's that saying with B2C, easy to gain, hard to maintain. B2B, hard to gain, a new user.
Stay with you.
Yeah, easy to maintain. So, so I that's something which I guess I really like about Elements. Because,
we are B2B. We try to, again, it depends, and I think you can't escape that, but we tend to stay away from enterprise sales.
Yes.
Because of the cycle. And obviously, sometimes you have to pivot towards a space, or you have to involve. So you have one startup that is helping SMEs, allowing SMEs to pay with credit card.
Yes.
With merchants that don't allow credit cards.
Okay.
So it's mostly B2C and SME space, but they also have enterprise offering.
Yes.
And that's yet another beast.
Yes, indeed.
Selling to enterprises, the sales cycles.
Yes.
so we try to kind of keep it quite being quite focused on B2B, but not necessarily enterprise.
Yes, I think that's a wise move.
for everyone, for investors, and for, I mean, it's tough, no?
Yes, yeah, indeed.
It's a beast in itself, and it's very binary. You can't have a bit of a contract. You either have it or not, and when you have it, it changes your whole balance sheet and your whole revenue growth.
That's
but
right.
If you don't, there's nothing in between.
Indeed. And it can take a very long time to find out whether you get those enterprise contracts or not. So a lot of investment.
And it takes so much effort and investment from the team. So it's a kind of conscious decision to try to stay clear, but obviously life happens.
Indeed. And so, Joanna, are you able to, I suppose, talk us through what the head of platform role is and, what your main focus is in that role?
Yes. So I'm very passionate about my role, and sometimes I do forget how great and hopefully impactful and rewarding role is. So I did some history lessons, and so historically the head of the platform role came out of US. I think the first platform role was back in 2014-15, and it was first round capital. And it was at the time when the capital was there, and there wasn't anymore a differentiator between different funds. But what became a bit of a differentiator is a post-investment support, which obviously at the beginning naturally would be provided by the partners and investment team. But as you scale and grow up your portfolio, rightly so, you can't scalably to the same extent support all of the portfolio companies. So funds started thinking about what would be the role that would allow for scalability, but yet a feeling that companies still have a great support and oversight of what's happening in the startup, and bringing the best people whenever needed to the companies. And I think that's originally how the platform role evolved. I think it sort of came to Europe probably maybe sort of 5-6 years ago. So first funds started having those roles, and again, originally they came out of people that are quite generalists, or they were the investment team and they wanted to get more involved in on the startup side. Ex-operators at the companies. So a platform role would typically involve activities that are focused on the fund. So bring brand awareness, PR, marketing. And the other side is more external facing, so supporting the startups. And I guess the priorities can shift throughout the year, but I would like to believe that majority of the role is dedicated to startups. And the framework I find really helpful to explain what then in the startups side, what platform role means is called top scan.
Wow.
It's a bit of, and I have my notes here just in case I forget anything. But so T stands for talent. Unlocking some of the blockers that you might have in the startup. Recommending really good headhunters and recruiters that are specializing in that particular sector. Quite opportunistically sometimes suggest good advisors or people from the government or that have some good visibility of regulation. So that's team. Always for operations. And that typically involves gathering the data, financial data from the startup, making sure we are documenting all the processes internally, making sure that we're capturing the right data of startups, and making sure that we know what's happening within the portfolio companies off the back of board meetings, but also all the touch points that investment team or wider team has with the portfolio company throughout the year. Making sure we capture those as well.
It's almost like a CRM for the team.
Yes, and I'm also I love tools.
Yes.
So any nice tool so we're actually using Notion for majority of
Okay.
portfolio touch points.
Yes.
Which I love.
It's a good tool.
Such a good tool. I'm a geek for it. But it's effectively trying to make sure that if anyone talks to the startup, we know the latest on the PR activities. We know what's happening, so they have a feeling that despite other team member from the investment team reaches out,
yes,
they have a feeling that we know what's happening.
Yeah, fantastic.
In the company. So that's O. Then P stands for perspectives.
Yes.
Which is, I guess, a way of looking out for the future. Mm-hmm. So if you like it, you can call it a moonshot or long-term vision.
Yes.
So anything that can impact that startup in the future. So we looked at probably horizon of sort of 9 to 12 months.
Okay.
Any regulation, any competitors,
yes.
Speeding up, or I guess anything that is a bit something that probably you wouldn't necessarily think about today,
yes,
but is important for the long-term long-term scenario of how things are shifting for them in the future.
Indeed.
Then we have S, which is skills.
Yes.
And that's usually has to do with either developing the leadership skills in the team or leadership team. In my role at Element, I like to look at not only C-suite but also people that are sort of driving that growth from different directions. So anything, so it could be a peer-to-peer networking.
Yes.
It could be even, I don't like necessarily a word mentoring, but if anything, just having a chat with someone that had similar problem.
Yeah, within the portfolio.
Within portfolio, but also externally. So
Okay.
So yes, Element is we are first fund.
Yes.
But the partners have been investing in that space for 10, 20 years.
Okay, fantastic.
So we've got really good networks of people that have gone through similar journey previously. Yes. Also, big chunk of the fund is actually contributed from ex-founders.
Yes.
So then we kind of latch on to their experience and if anything, it's just more, it's not necessary to give advice. It's to kind of ask the right questions.
Sure.
And I think also the context of every single situation is different. So some things that might have worked even 5 years ago, they might be really redundant today.
Sure.
So that's the sort of skills element to it. C is for customer development. So big part of it is which I really like. I think it's my favorite bit, is finding different companies that you would have never thought about.
Yes.
That could be a really great partner and potential customer to the portfolio companies.
Yes.
And because you have so many portfolio companies, I almost like a challenge of sometimes finding a really company that you would never think, and thinking about the value proposition that any one of the startups could actually bring to the company. So it could be anything, could be partnerships, collaboration, or actually direct sales.
Fantastic.
So that's the customer development. A is for analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And that typically involves looking at some of the data that we're collecting from companies and making sure we have, so I'm, for example, facilitating, helping the team to kind of get up to speed on all the portfolio companies on our quarterly reviews.
Yes. Collecting
the right data, showing the trends, showing how they, what's the trend line, whether they are under or over the budget.
Yes.
And again, looking at those challenges.
So that's a real focus on the sort of unit economics there in the numbers.
Yes, the numbers, making sure that we understand the margin, the gross margin. If they're dropping, we know why. And I think part of the reason why I would believe that Element, I'm biased obviously, but Element Venture is a good partner because we have people that have a real domain expertise in those unit economics, how they change over time.
Yes.
What is the difference between we also invest in insurance, so the carrier, what are the pros and cons of underwriting your risk, outsourcing it to someone else,
yes,
and making those really strategic decisions and helping companies to actually make those decisions based on the knowledge that we've had throughout the years. So looking at those numbers, an early indication of something might be a bit off, or so early warning signs of things that we should be looking out for.
Yes, fantastic.
Alongside the founders, obviously. They are really good always at looking at what might go wrong or where are things that they should optimize on. So that's the analysis piece. And the last piece of the puzzle is, which I guess underpins all of that, is network. And again, that it's either our networks at Element, so my personal ones, but also the networks of our networks, and all of the founders in our portfolio, which are going through a very similar journey. So that kind of describes it all. And I like the framework because it's not only talks about what to do we do it, but also how we do it, because a lot of things have to have a scalability in mind. So we now have just under 15 companies in the portfolio, but the idea is that all of those activities that we perform on daily basis potentially can scale in the future. So it's not linked to. So I'm not the single blocker to allow companies to interact with the networks of Element Ventures.
Absolutely. Well, look, I think you've summarized a massive role very well, and the top scan approach is a very good one.
I hope if anything, it helps me to find focus at times, because as you can imagine, the biggest challenge is actually finding the right balance between supporting portfolio companies, performing activities that are really good for Element as a fund, and trying to kind of make sure that you're keeping the right balance. But it's a lot of things that are involved in the process.
Indeed, it sounds like it. And I love the beginning part as well, where you spoke about sort of the history of the role, and capital being deployed, and then actually how can we provide support afterwards, because I think one challenge that founders have is that they receive the money and then they're like, oh, far out, now it's time to use it efficiently.
Exactly. And I think that's it's bad if you don't have money, and it's bad if you have it. It seems like it, but sometimes making sure that you put the right resources, to the right activities. Is the biggest challenge. And I think one of the questions that we thought about would be good to chat about is what are the challenges that the founders have, and I think maybe that's a good sort of point to touch on that. And one of it is the kind of analysis paralysis, where you have you've gathered, you want to do your research really, really well, and you've probably talked to tens of people, and you will end up having conflicting advice from all of them, and you just don't make a decision, and you kind of delay making a decision. And on my first startup that I worked at, we always said that it's better done than perfect.
Indeed.
And I know it's hard. We're all perfectionists, and we would like to say, oh, it's just MVP should just be, but we always want the product to be really amazing. But it is sometimes a biggest challenge is that too much advice, too much input, and you can't really consolidate. You diverge, but you can't converge those ideas, which is a tricky situation to be in.
It's really important to translate, those ideas into traction or into numbers, taking the next step is very difficult at times. And so one thing at Revolut that, you know, they would always hone in on was just break it down into as many small pieces as possible, and then just start with, you know, one by one, the little steps. No? Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
But it's, if anything, it's a mindset. It has nothing to do with a product or it's a mindset that you take. But once you're in it, you feel like, oh, if I do one more thing, I will have that visibility.
Yes.
If I add a bit more data, or I talk to a bit more people, I will know where to expand next. But I don't think there is that level of transparency and visibility that you will ever have to make sure that your decision is.
There will always be something more that you want when making a decision.
It's like that in life as well.
Yes.
You kind of feel like, oh, if I do it one more time, then I'm sure it will be easier.
Yeah.
It won't be now.
That's right. I think that's a really good challenge that you've mentioned. Are there any other sort of key challenges or recurring ones that you find from founders in the portfolio or in general?
I think maybe the second one would be around talent.
Yes.
And it's on two levels. So one is, I guess, knowing what a good person for that stage looks like, what sort of qualities would they have. So that's on the positive side.
Yes.
But also on the not necessarily negative, but knowing when people that had those qualities and they were really good at certain stage,
yes,
they may be not necessarily have the same qualities that would be good for the next stage of the company.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily something that I've seen, but I know it's proven that even with founders,
yes,
at some point there comes the time where either they or the board,
yes,
as much as supportive as they can be of the founder, it comes to a place, and it also comes with a place where they could be just tired. And if anything, I always come from a deep, I guess, empathy and admiration to the founders,
yes,
that they've managed to pursue for such a long time and always at such a high pace, and there might come to time that they feel like they no longer sort of want to be involved. But that also comes to talent. So I guess the talent on a positive side, meaning making sure that you know exactly what you're looking for, and you're not only looking for qualities that, for example, you have and you respect in other person, because we like to find the people that mirror ourselves.
Yes.
So that what good looks like, but also making sure that you recognize that those inflection points where you feel like that person was great at that stage.
Yeah.
Moving forward, we need different qualities to push forward.
Indeed, and that's a tough one for businesses, but it's a super important one, because to get from 1 to 10 requires some skills. To go from 10 to 100 or 100 to 1,000, they're different skill sets.
They're different, and it's different personality types.
Yes.
And I also recognize that. I'm sure when you scope and start a project, you're super excited.
Yeah.
Because it's in you. And then when it comes to sort of execution of it, on optimizing on 2 or 3 metrics,
yes,
it's just not their skill set. But it takes you have to distance yourself from your role to recognize that maybe it's the time to move to something else.
Yes, indeed. And going back to TopScan, you mentioned that the C really gets you excited, because it's the customer development side of things. And you know, one point that we've discussed a couple of times before is community. And would you say that community would also fall within the C of TopScan?
I think so, and I think I think sales can have such a bad rep, And I think the main reason is that because maybe sometimes we are associated with those people that email you 4 or 5 times a month. The only thing changes is the kind of the beginning of the
message.
Email. What happened was a good weekend. But I think a lot of times it's so from my perspective always been about timing.
Yes.
So there's no right conversation at any given time. It has to, and if it does, it's the magic happens. What I said, like connecting the dots, where you have a person that has real problem and they need a new real solution, and these two come together and it just takes off. And I think so in my role I would necessarily look at, because I effectively I wouldn't be able to do the proper customer development for, also it's not necessarily my background, but I do talk to a lot of people and I'm really interested in their work, in how they do things, how they approach things, where they see things heading. And if I have the roadmap of a startup and know where they're heading and their alignments on those, then I think that's my favorite type of introduction, saying there's a magic happening. Two things come together really nicely, the right time. And I guess that's my favorite. And also on the partnership side, when you see two companies that are really aligned on what they want to achieve in the future, and they come together and it just works really well. They work alongside each other really well, and it delivers a really great value to an end customer. It's a really nice way of doing it. That's why I think embedded products and embedded lending, subscription management, embedded products are interesting category. Like with I'm sure at Revolut, like I think at Web Summit, the CEO said that we just felt like we needed we felt like our users wanted a messaging feature, so we built it. And no one would ever thought that Revolut will have a messaging, but that's what the users want. I think there's two things coming together. It's a very interesting thing that I'm very passionate about. I really enjoy.
Absolutely, and I think there's a lot to dive into from that answer. So let me start with your last point first, because it's interesting that Revolut's brought in the chat feature almost as a late feature relative to some of the super apps in Asia, for example. Like WeChat started off as a chat and then they introduced payments and whatnot afterwards. So there's been a lot of talk about whether Revolut would be the super app of Europe. And so it will be interesting to see adoption of that chat feature. But in terms of the points you made, particularly about embedded products and partnerships, I think that's a really good way to secure growth. I remember with Revolut Business, we had a partnership with Xero in terms of accounting, and so it created this addressable market. So anybody that had a small business that used Xero was automatically qualified to potentially be a Revolut Business customer because all of the accounting pain points were solved. So I think, product integrations are a great way to create an addressable market and remove the friction when it comes to doing different things. I think one of my favorite examples of that is Deal, which they help you hire people overseas, but then you can also get insurance for those people or purchase laptops for them all within the platform. It's a fantastic example of embedded products, I think.
And it really solved the problem, because at any given time you'll and if you have to go out of the platform and look for things, there will always be friction. So we're also working in a company that is an embedded insurance. They make it really nice and simple to buy insurance at any given moment, whether you go for skiing. I remember I was doing a fantastic experience. By the way, I was doing tech bikers trip, and we cycled from Paris to London.
Yes.
And I have not realized how big problem was it to insure your whole trip.
Yes.
Because some companies would only insure the bike,
Yes.
some companies would only insure the trip itself and the various items, and it becomes such a hassle.
Indeed.
And it should have been so easy.
Yes.
So they making that so you don't have to worry about insurance, but you obviously you want to make sure that everything is covered.
Yeah.
So all those little moments where you have like, oh, so annoying.
Yes.
Or takes you to a browser and loads, and you feel like, oh, this is really bad. All those frictionless moments that you can do to ensure that, and it's also great for, I'm sure in Revolut, they would have really good KYC'd and checked customers.
Yes.
And Xero had a really nice value that they could add to their customers.
Indeed, yeah. And in terms of the community-led growth, I want to talk about actually something or a conversation from a previous podcast.
Yes.
So it was a guy called Matt Hicks, who's the VP of Sales, I think, at Vertice, which focus on procurement as a service, essentially. Okay. And what the example that Matt gave was of these little communities that exist. So let's say CFO communities who talk about different financial products that they'll buy, or let's say a sales communities, and they talk about what's the best CRM. And you know, I think it's great because it shows how beneficial it can be from a recommendation point of view that you touched upon before. These communities, someone will say, oh yeah, you know, you're having this problem, look at this solution. And it's come from a non-sales approach. But also, let's say for businesses that want to do product development and research, they can look at these communities and they've got all the insights there.
All the insights, and people do. I think there's also maybe there's a shift in how we do business, but people do really want to, the products that they love, they want to make them genuinely better.
Yeah.
And how they do it is by saying, hey guys, have you thought about this? Or I've used this was good, this was bad.
Yes.
And ultimately it's not negative. I think people start perceiving it as a negative. They just want to improve. But from product perspective, it's kind of having an ear on the ground. What's happening, what people are saying, was the sentiment. It's super important, especially for companies that really do care. I think I've seen on LinkedIn, again mentioning Notion. I don't get any commission from Notion, but if Notion is interested in, I would definitely be up for it. But they just posted a link, a LinkedIn post saying, hey, I just joined Notion. If there are any users that would like to chat with me about what's happening, what they like, what they don't like, just put a comment in a LinkedIn post.
Yes.
And that way of sort of, and I think they got like 100 comments.
Wow.
Obviously a big company, but that sort of level of direct conversations with the customers is the best.
Indeed, yeah. You'll always get more insights by, you know, speaking with the customers. That's why I think they say about companies is that your front line is, you know, your strongest line.
You're strong, and I think I was talking to someone at, we're very lucky to have Cloudflare, senior customer support person in doing a workshop for our startups back at Cylon, and he mentioned that he's I think 10 or there's some significant percentage of people every year that leave support team and go to product, to engineering, because they know the product inside out. They're amazing people that just know what's happening and they can see the trends. And that's why he said we're always losing those valuable insight, because people are in those roles are very in tune with what's happening in the actual users' hands.
Yes, indeed. And that, they're able to make huge impact when they can take that, let's say, to a product role or feed the suggestion back to a product manager who's then able to execute on the demands and the feedback that they're hearing.
And I think, and the companies that feel like users of those companies that feel like their feedback has been taken into account.
Yes.
The loyalty that it builds, they feel respected, and they feel like someone is been listening. So I think one of the companies, so there's another example of embedded product, one of our companies making it really easy for you to manage your subscription in the banking app.
Yes.
And again, I was talking with one of the people that is responsible for managing the merchant side, and I said, perfectly honest, why would merchants allow users to cancel their subscription? And she said, well, actually, you really build loyalty.
Yes.
When you make it easy, and people are less likely to cancel, they're more likely to pause. Yes. And then unpause it when they feel like it.
Yes.
Unless otherwise they're being forced. It's again binary decision of not having it at all, or agreeing to something that you're not fully comfortable with, and they make the whole process a lot more easy and a lot more seamless. Yes. And that only builds the loyalty of the customer, as opposed to losing them, because you as a user, you have empowered your user to say, we just respect your. It's like with gyms now, you used to have to subscribe to a gym for a year. Yeah. So like, what if I move? I was like, well, then you're stuck. Well, that's not a very respectful way of looking at exercise. Yeah. But that's the same type of dynamic.
That's right. And I think Amazon did something similar where they would recommend a cheaper product to different customers as well. I must caveat that I'm not sure whether they would recommend their own product, and so a merchant would lose out. But there was definitely something that they were doing where
user first,
it was exactly user first, and even if Amazon made a bit less money on it, as a result, they would still put the user first and do it.
But it's the same strategy that they have with all the refunds and cancellations. They rather give you the money back than you going through the claim process and a hassle. Yes. Because they know that in long term, you would choose them over any other provider.
Indeed. And you'll talk about them positively as well.
You would. And you'd say, like, actually, it's really impressive.
Yes.
And there's some brands, they're not doing it very well. You feel like once you got into subscription, you're trapped. And you feel like there's a cancellation fee. And then you try to be equally cheeky, but canceling your standing order. Yes. And then you go back, and then you have a cancellation fee always close back onto to your account. So it creates a bad dynamic.
Indeed it does. And I guess I'm going to use that as a way to share a quick tip with the audience. Whenever you find yourself in strife, if you Google the CEO of the company, normally you'll find their email address, and so you can just write an email to them and say, hey, I'm having difficulty getting my money back. And it honestly, it works wonders.
Really?
Oh yes, yeah. It really, really works. So I actually had to do it last week when my electricity, I was trying to get it set up in a new place. No response from customer service. Wrote a quick email to the CEO of Octopus. They replied straight away. They were fantastic. So not the CEO, but part of their team replied straight away. Got it sorted. So
wow.
A quick tip, a quick win.
Email CEO.
Yes.
Dear Elon.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. Like, please improve the Twitter feed.
My Tesla is not working today.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So that's definitely a bigger problem.
Let's focus on that. Let's not go into the whole Twitter.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it really shows that it's a two-way street. And I think that's why I think it's also the mentality of people have changed, because no one would ever think that the CEOs would have the time. But I think now, because such a community and product led. And I think also it probably what's impacted is that users do have a lot of options now. And
Yes.
if it's not a two-way relationship, it's gonna backfire at some point.
That's right.
So you might as well just really be respectful and communicate things in a clear way that makes people not be taken advantage of.
Indeed, and I think that really ties in well with the beginning of our conversation today about, B2C and the high churn rates. And yeah, it's easy for them to go, so they'll go.
Exactly, and I think that's it's sometimes scary how easily, as you said, acquired, but then the engagement goes down, and then you feel like, where are they? And it's not always necessarily as easy to grab their attention again or grab attention of a new audience.
Indeed.
So B2C scares me.
No, me too. We've spoken a lot about communities that different startups have, but what are your views on community within, say, the platform role space?
So I think that's the best example of a real community that comes to life, and I think there is I think Superhuman, the email app, was judging how good the community is by seeing if you, let's say, take away that community tomorrow,
yes,
how sad you would be. And I think one of the things I would be very sad about if anyone took my WhatsApp group with the VC community managers,
yes,
or those Slack channels, because there is such an abundance of knowledge, but also there is a great feeling of transparency and honesty.
Yes.
And as you can imagine, like, some of the funds would have relatively small platform teams.
Yes.
Or at the moment at Element it's only me. I've got support from the team, but it's only me. And sometimes it can be a very lonely job. But every now and then I have a little pep talk or a little chat with someone that used the tool that I'm not really familiar with.
Yes.
And they're always so willing to just jump on the call, answer all the questions, and expect nothing in return.
Yes.
So if there's one thing about the community in the platform that is working well, is definitely one of those making community come to action. And I think there is a really great team of one of them. I give a shout out to KG Mustafa, who's now at Partech.
Yes.
And she's fantastic at making people feel like belong, like there's no questions that are bad questions.
Yes.
She always makes people really feel welcomed. And,
fantastic.
So that's one of the things that the community in those terms comes to life, and
yes,
that's really a case in all the platform roles. So yeah, great shout out to all the people out there that always give you recommendations of the random questions that you might have about Estonian General Council. There's always an answer there.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that's a great example.
Yeah, no, it's a real one.
Joanna, we've covered a lot today. It's been fantastic. Are there any sort of key takeaways that you'd like to give to founders or operators about, let's say, coping with these difficult economic times?
I think what is important, and I guess it's important always, but I think in the times where you really think about how do I spend that $1, or pound, or euro, elsewhere, is building good products.
Yes.
That really do either solve a real problem or creating a new markets that you haven't thought about before.
Yes.
Products that really are working. If you are at earlier stages, that would be my advice. And at that stage, probably it's the best, if you can, don't look for funding in the times when there's trouble, because I think there's a lot of people that might also leverage or take advantage of the situation.
Okay.
And if you have a good, healthy business model,
yes,
that always defends itself. And at later stages, look at your, as we discussed, the unit economics. What are the optimizations that you could potentially leverage?
Yes.
Look at any projects that can make the margin slightly better, and all those projects that you always thought or be nice to have,
Yes.
but not necessarily must have.
Mm-hmm.
How do you bring those closer to make it a business run more efficiently? I think the predictions have been that probably, hopefully, we'll see some slowdown in the consumer space, the beginning of 2023, and then hopefully later, around sort of 6-9 months time, that will pick up again on the investment side, because the investors, I feel like investment slow down a bit.
Yes.
But the money is still there, and you have to draw on those money at some point.
Yes.
And so it will come back. It's a very cyclical process, but I appreciate if you are under constraints, you'll have a lot of movement. So I would say build good products that solve real problems, create new markets, and focus on the efficiency, look inward and focus on the efficiency of the business. And that would never go unnoticed.
Indeed. Look, Joanna, thank you so much for sharing those.
No.
Any closing thoughts?
I think, and the last thing that I wanted to sort of kind of circle back to my role
Yes.
is don't be scared to ask the VCs that you're talking to about how do you provide the value after. If anything, the investors will actually really respect that.
Yes.
Whenever I talk to our founders that we're working with, I always like, if in doubt, always ask. And I might not be able to help, but I always like to think that I know who to ask, who will be able to help.
Indeed.
For sure. And one of the metrics that we have at Element is how many emails it took us to get to the right person.
Wow.
And
yeah.
we'd like to optimize for every time we have a question, to optimize for less and less.
Yes.
So it's always good to ask and see if there's anything that we could do to the founders.
Indeed, and that's a fantastic metric.
It
because,
is a good metric. No?
Yeah, it's something, like support teams would look at in terms of how many emails or interactions until we could resolve this for a customer. And ultimately, your portfolio companies are your customers.
Yes. So today I got an email from one of the founders, and she said, "Would you like to? That was really good. Would you like to work for us?" I was like, I'm already working for you. I'm part of. I like to feel like I'm an extension of the team.
Yes.
Trying to optimize for the things that they're trying to optimize, and always trying to be as helpful, but without overloading with too many research or distractions.
Yes.
So just being laser focused on what they're trying to achieve and help them as much as possible in that journey.
Indeed. Joanna, thank you so much for sharing today. We really appreciate learning more about your role, about you, and your views of the market.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, and to all the founders out there. I think it's challenging times, but Venmo came out of a crisis in 2008 and 2009. So
yes,
and they did very well.
Indeed,
so, if nothing, it's one person's challenge is another person's or another startup opportunity. So if anything, that's the sort of parting thought.
Indeed, I agree 100%. Thank you so much again, Joanna.
Thank you so much, Lucas.